Good evening. Welcome back to Ordinary People. We're gathered again, the same bunch. We have Andrew at the controls.
Hi.
He's also going to be leading the conversation as well. Neil's here as well. Still,
I am here, but a bit sad that I'm not going to be taking charge tonight. But I'm happy to sit back and listen here. Looking forward.
and Andrew's going to introduce his friend Attila. So, Andrew, do you want to introduce, please?
Yep. So this is Attila Vago. Very good friend of mine. Really pleased to have him on the podcast today. We we set a very easy topic for him, which is digital responsibility. So we'll see where this goes. For anyone who knows us, Paul and I and Attila are all pretty techie. Neil, it's safe to say, is not, and I think proudly so. So he's going to be our he's going to be the audience observer today. Maybe keep us on the straight and narrow and stop us if we go too far. I said before we started that he was going to be like our canary in the coal mine. So when we see him keel over, we know we have to stop and wind it back a bit. But I'm really glad to have you on, Neil.
Thanks, guys. This is going to be fun.
And then Attila, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I was saying we'd probably all be if we were left without Neil, we'd probably be three old men talking about how the internet was better back in our day. But why don't we start off with you telling us a bit about back in your day? Tell us a bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, back in my day, I suppose that goes back to the 80s. So yeah, I'm originally from Romania, or some would call it Transylvania. Depends on how Hungarian they feel. And then for those who don't exactly know the geography of Romania, Transylvania is actually part of Romania, but used to be part of Hungary, and now you'd find a lot of ethnically Hungarian people in Romania. But I always wanted to leave home because one has to make their own home. So yeah, I ended up in various countries, and for the last 9 or nearly 10 years, I've been on this Emerald Isle. I've been both north and south, and now I'm in the south in Dublin. But I've lived also 3.5 years in Belfast, worked for a number of tech companies, and also a car company just to jazz things up, though I know nothing about cars, and I will happily admit that. And I admitted that when I applied for the job as well, and they said it doesn't matter. So yeah, I'm a senior software engineer. Work a lot on accessibility as well, and I'm just a general tech nerd who likes technology and likes to use it the right way in an increasingly technological world.
Okay, thank you. And just getting back to your some of the places you've been. So I think at this point you probably lived everywhere except Rich Hill, and I know a lot of the people we've had on the podcast are all from Rich Hill. Every time I get to talk to somebody, it seems it's the person that's not from Rich Hill. So I had somebody from Belfast, and now I got somebody from a bit further afield. But you've lived in Belfast. You started with the Best Ireland first, and then you moved to Dublin. And I love something you said a few years ago about how Dublin feels like home to you. How you're almost identified as being Irish before you realised what that meant.
Yeah, it's kind of funny looking back because before I even got to this island, regardless of was it Belfast or Dublin, I started watching a lot of Irish music videos, such as Celtic Women, Celtic Thunder, and a few others. And I genuinely love the music, and it's funny to find myself on that actual island that this music comes from. So of course I lived in Belfast for 3.5 years, and it was fine. I mean, I did at one point even think of settling there for the long term. But then things changed, and it's technically thanks to Andrew that I ended up in Dublin. And while living in Belfast, I never really thought of living in Dublin, and it kind of scared me a little bit, moving down south. But then I started working here. It felt like just the right place to be. And within 3 months, I moved here.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And it's hard to believe that how long it's been since we met.
Yeah, it's what? It's 5, 6, 7 or so
So
years.
something like that now. And I think part of what helped form our friendship was that sort of deep-seated love for technology. You know, not just working on it, but working with it and hacking it and making it do things it's not meant to do, and just the joy that comes from taking things apart and figuring it out. And I know not everyone gets that, but I think that's one of the things I think that helped us get to know each other.
It definitely helped, yeah. And yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to friendship between men, it really does come down to hobbies and interests. Um, yeah, I think the way you like to hack around and tinker with things, same is true for me. Um, and definitely when we worked together, it was a lot of a lot about that, just trying to see what works best.
Yeah, and that's a good segue, seeing what works best into the topic. So digital responsibility. It's a very broad topic. So you could be talking about that at a personal level, a corporate level, a civic level. You could even talk about digital responsibility in terms of yourself or your responsibility towards others. But what does it mean towards you? What was your, I suppose, whenever I mentioned the topic to you, what was your first reaction? What popped into your head?
Yeah. um you know we call it digital responsibility, but at the end of the day, if you really look at it, it just does come down to just responsibility. And then if you look at it from that perspective, I can kind of think of three things that digital responsibility means to me. First of all, common sense. Secondly, good manners, and thirdly, good education. And the order is not entirely important here, but you would use these three elements in everyday life on a daily basis. You know, you don't go out shouting at people and calling them names on the street randomly. The same applies on from a digital perspective as well. You go online, and if you start doing that, shouting at people randomly and calling them names, that's irresponsible behavior, and it shows that you don't have good manners. Or education, you wouldn't print out the leaflet with false information and start giving it to people, or most people wouldn't anyway. um, the same way you shouldn't share information on the internet that is false. So you tend not to make a habit of lying in the real world, if so you don't do that in the digital world as well. So yeah, these three things are what kind of digital responsibility means to me. It's kind of taking the same responsibility you take in the real world, and translate that to your digital presence.
That's good. That's good. And that's I think that's something that it's it's a bit of an oddity, isn't it? That you mentioned that you wouldn't shout at somebody in the street, but yet there's an awful lot of shouting and calling names on the internet, and you'd be embarrassed, you'd be disgraced if you did that outside. Although I must say that I was walking through Rich Hill one day, and you know somebody shouted out the window at someone else that I was with, and they shouted back, and apparently that's just normal in Rich Hill. Um,
Be
But was it
careful, Andrew.
communication, or were they calling them names?
oh, they were calling them names. They were calling them names.
Okay.
But that's maybe Rich Hill. Rich Hill can jump in and defend itself if it wants.
Andrew, you have to be careful. That is, you're heading into dodgy territory with that.
But you see, because I know that I've offended you, Neil, I'll apologise because that's the right thing to
That's
do.
good manners. That's good
Yes.
manners, and you're showing a lack of education here with Jill in that way.
But that's the thing with the internet, though, is there is this tendency to just say whatever you want. There's no filter, and I don't know where that necessarily comes from. You mentioned education there as being one of the key things. What would you say to somebody who said, "Well, look, this technology stuff, I don't understand it. I didn't know I wasn't meant to say things like that. I didn't know I wasn't meant to, spread lies on the internet or insult people. I didn't know how to do this." What would you say to someone with that sort of attitude?
Well, attitudes are the result of things we either got used to or things the way we understand the world around us. It depends on on the age and the background of the person. In Romania, there's this saying that if you translate it into English, it kind of translates to 7 years of home. What that actually tries to say is that back in Eastern Europe, most countries, you'd start school at the age of 7, and you're kind of expecting that between the age of 1 and 7, your parents teach you some things like manners and a little bit of common sense, just the bare basics to function in society. So now that kids are picking up technology very early, this is something that I would see parents teaching their children. Just like you don't call someone names on the street, you don't call someone names on the internet either. So if it's a child, then you still have that space to educate. If it's an adult, it becomes a lot more difficult. So then I wouldn't say the ship has sailed, but it's a lot more difficult to get someone out of their existing habit and turn it into a new one. And this is where I suppose a little bit of regulation can help. How websites are being like, for example, back in the day, you'd go on a forum and the forum would have moderators. I was actually a moderator on a very large website back in Romania for a few years. And if someone said something that wasn't fit for the topic, even they were off topic, the message was deleted. There was that kind of censorship, and they were educated. They, of course, you tell them first you cannot go off topic, but if they wouldn't listen and wouldn't learn, then you'd start deleting the posts. And that's you'd see a lot of most people would learn. They would understand what off topic means if they didn't know before, and kind of get used to what the rules and the norms are around using the web.
Yep, and I think it's not that computers or even the web are a new thing. They have been around for quite a while. Even in Northern Ireland, we've had it for 20, 25 plus years. I'm trying to think back to the kind of the big boom. I was in school and everyone started jumping online with things like FreeServe. It was kind of the explosion, and that was the start of it. And that was the late 90s here. I know different parts of the world and maybe different places in the country. People were online earlier, but that was kind of a big boom. And very early on, you would hear stories about kids who had ran up massive phone bills, for example, because they'd been online. Now, for anyone that is listening that is under the age of 30, it used to be that if you wanted to go on the internet, Paul, I'm going to put you on screen so you can do a little gesture again. Just can you?
Well, I'm still under 30, but I only have a month left, so I'm in your club still. Ha.
You mean you're still in the 30 bracket? You mean not under 30?
Oh yeah, I'm 30. I'm in my 30s. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Not under.
I thought you were going to get Paul to like use his musical talent to do what do you call that sound, the
The
dial-up
modem.
sound.
I thought he was going to do a modem sound as well. Yeah. So you had to plug your computer into your telephone. You couldn't use your
Yes.
phone, or it would knock you off the internet. It had to phone up the internet, and you were paying by the minute, by whatever, to the phone number that your computer called to get you online. And back then, so this is the late 90s, people were running up massive bills. Now I was one of those people. Not so massive that there was ever a newspaper article written, but I know that I do remember it was at least £200-300 phone bill one month. And my parents hit
Jesus.
the roof.
What?
I was young. Digital responsibility, Paul. This was the start of it, and my parents quickly learned that you have to put a cap on these things. I learned that you have to do that. Now that was 25 odd years ago. Even now, today you're hearing stories about kids who have ran up massive bills on their parents' phones through in-app purchases, or buying movies, or buying V-Bucks in Fortnite, or whatever it is. It's no different than it was with massive phone bills 25 years ago. Why? And any of you can jump in.
Well,
Why have we not figured this out yet?
we have. I'm not sure why people in Northern Ireland haven't done this, but
It's
in
not just
like,
Northern Ireland.
okay, well, yeah, I know. But I had dial-up internet for a while as well, and of course I knew it cost tons of money to be on the internet for a long time. So what I did, we had these prepaid cards that you could buy. It basically was a card that you bought for X amount of money, and then you had a code on it, and you could use it to get online. And once the money ran out, you were offline. So I used my pocket money and to buy those cards, and sometimes they would last me 2 hours, sometimes it would last me 10 hours, depending on the money I spent on the cards. But it was my pocket money. It never really affected the phone bill. So I suppose I was more responsible.
I wonder if that's a Western Europe versus Eastern Europe thing there, where we're just all a little bit too spoiled here in the West, or Western Europe.
Look, if we are to be really serious about this, I think that the market in Eastern Europe realized that they can't exactly expect people to pay tons and tons of cash for dial-up, so they kind of gave this more affordable approach where you'd buy bits and bits of internet for a few minutes or a few hours, and it would I still think it helped the internet culture grow in Eastern Europe, and then quickly after dial-up, Romania and Hungary actually became, and especially Romania became, one of the countries with the highest bandwidth of internet early on. I remember we had gigabit internet many years before the UK even or Ireland even knew what that looked like. And Romania still has very, very high bandwidth internet at very, very low cost.
And I guess that's what you get whenever you invest in it early, and people are invested in the technology as well, and using it properly.
Yeah,
Everyone benefits.
some of my schoolmates had fiber internet when I was in high school.
So thinking about using technology properly, not just the internet. I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit here, but is there really a right way and a wrong way to use technology? You cannot just use it whatever way you want. Sure, who's it going to hurt?
Well, yeah, I mean, technically you can use everything any way you like, But yeah, there is a right way and the wrong way, but it takes time to find out what that is.
And I realize me saying that is a bit like, like saying that about, chainsaws. It's like, I don't need to read the manual. I can use this whatever way I want.
Yes, but then you bring risks upon yourself to harm yourself or others around you. Um, and the manuals exist because other peoples have kind of tried before to use them the wrong way, and they, well, failed. So now you have the manual to kind of evangelize all that information to everyone else who tries to use it the wrong way.
This is like the caution contents may be hot.
Yeah.
So,
Now, I would, you'd expect common sense to also help you out there. This is, going back to what I was saying: common sense, good manners, and education. You see something sharp, the first thing you do is you don't start, poking at yourself with it.
yeah, it's good. So a couple of weeks ago, we had a guest on the show, Donna, who I was talking to about disability. And I know you mentioned earlier, you work in the field of accessibility, which is something
Yeah.
that I'm very passionate about as well. But just want you to talk a little bit about that. And because when I said, like, who could it hurt? I think you could probably give an example of how just doing something the wrong way or doing something the way you think it is okay will actually have a serious impact for people.
Yeah. So I think 2 years ago, I called the current web, uh, called it like a digital holocaust, um, because it's basically excluding a very, very high number of people, around, roughly speaking, around a billion. And that's a very high number if you consider that we're nearly at 8 billion people at the moment on this planet. 98 or so percent of the current web is just not accessible. It's not usable by disabled folks, which points to the problem that they are trying to use it the right way, but it was built the wrong way. And if designers and developers and companies develop these applications and these websites out there um, that are not adhering to certain standards that already have been created and have been around for many, many years, since kind of the dawn of the web, really. Yes, you can definitely say that there's a wrong way to do, and to the point of today's podcast, also an irresponsible way of developing something for the web. um, if I create my site and blind people cannot understand what's on it, then what's the point, really?
Mm-hmm.
I'm all I'm then my site may as well just say, I don't care about blind people. I don't consider disabled people as being on the same human existence level that everybody else is, which is it's way beyond irresponsible. It's just creating such a division between humans that it to me it brings to mind the David star that was used back in World War, of differentiating people and then giving them or barring them from certain possibilities that the world should otherwise give them.
And people might think, that okay, that maybe that's a bit extreme. But if you think about what we use the internet for now, it's not just reading the news, although that it's in itself is important. But there's online banking, shopping. In this past year, there's been a surge in communication online, and even us on this podcast now. We we would have done this in person, but we're doing this online. Everything, or there's been such a massive jump in people using online services that if you don't cater for people with additional needs, that then they are like you say, they are being cut off from parts of society.
Yes, but and when you say additional needs, and I think this is we say this because we're it's kind of muscle memory to say it, but technically that shouldn't matter because they have needs and I have needs and everyone else has their own needs. Developing something and putting out on the web an application or a website that's accessible, it helps everyone. When you can fill out a form without moving the mouse around 10 million times, just using the keyboard tabbing to each next form field, that's accessibility, and it's not also not difficult to implement. And not by not doing that, you're making everyone else's experience a lesser experience. I'm an Apple fan and I use the Magic Mouse, which charges on the back of it. Whenever my mouse's battery depletes, I need to flip it upside down and charge it. And then if I'm not using a laptop, I'm down to using my keyboard. If it's an accessible site or an accessible application, I can just use my keyboard and keep doing my job. And I don't need a second mouse to achieve what I was set out to do. And you were saying, there's more and more applications out there that people use, and especially, during the pandemic, education and web shops and all of that are the life, and the internet is basically the lifeline of what we can do during this time. And even things that seem trivial, like I know someone who is blind, and she was giving out about the fact that she has to use Tinder for dating, which is probably one of the worst applications for dating. But she has to use Tinder because that's the most accessible one out there. All the other competitor applications were just not good enough, not up to the job.
I think this actually goes back to what you mentioned at the beginning about like what you would do in person and what you wouldn't, and what you would do online. It's a lot of it comes down to that, just not thinking about other people. It's almost a to use harsh language, it's almost a selfishness that people have. Even if, and for some people might not realize, and they're not explicitly setting out to build something that is excluding other people. But I think not considering and not not like you said about not educating yourself and not taking responsibility, not finding out what is the proper way to do this. It is ultimately quite a selfish act.
Yeah, it is, and I think the less you care about the larger picture, the less you lose the ability to empathize. And I think empathy is not something that everyone is born with. Some people need to learn it, but I think it's a skill that, especially in the digital world, it's very useful. You see someone's comment on Facebook that you don't agree with. You can disagree. It's okay to disagree, but do it in in the style of a debate rather than an attack. Because you don't know where they come from. You don't know what they've done in their life. You don't know how they feel. Maybe they just feel down and they're exposing their frustration on the internet, which isn't great. But using empathy in the digital world is extremely important. It is one of the things that will will make you think twice before you share something, post something, act in any way on the internet.
Attila, I think that's really helpful. Not even like obviously I'm a complete novice when it comes to the tech side of this conversation, but I'm listening to you talk about um like react how you reacted to the additional needs there. I found very interesting, and your response to that. We all have needs, and I think that's probably that's somewhere that surely that's the beginning of empathy. Like
Yeah.
we come into that place. So I think even so. Let me put what I where I know where I'm most comfortable is probably like in the church world, say for example, and
Mm.
it's easy for us to point out the finger and say they have additional needs or they're broken. But actually, the truth is we all have certain needs and we're all broken in a certain way. And I think we're often I just find that really interesting where you're going with that. I think it's actually just helpful to think of that not just in the tech world, but I think beyond the tech world as well. I suppose again, while I'm listening, from an ignorant point of view, like what's the reasons for that huge number of people not having the accessibility that they need and deserve? Is it a lack of understanding, a lack of or is it selfishness? Is it people have decided it's not worth the cost, it's not worth the energy, the time? What do you, from your experience, do you know why that is?
Um, there are a number of reasons, and some of them are very, very complex. Um, when the first web browser was created, and Andrew can chime in here as well because he might actually have more historical evidence to
I mean,
this
I
than
don't
I would.
remember it happening, if that's what you're implying.
No, but you dabbled with the web before me. But from what I know, the web standard, the standard that allows you to browse a web page currently on the internet in the way that you do, included accessibility from the very beginning. So I think it was Tim Berners-Lee who started this whole thing, and you know the very origins of the web cared about everybody, but the dirty detail is that you can the browser will render that site even if it's not made accessible. So that people caught on that I don't have to do all these things just to show the website. So people kind of stopped doing it unless they were told to do it. And because of course there was a dot-com boom, and everybody wanted a website. Of course, companies wanted to create websites quickly for their clients, and it was it was quicker to develop something that wasn't accessible than something that was, because it didn't involve any research into what kind of users they had, and so on and so forth. Um, and they could save money on that kind of work, and thus ended up in a situation where it these companies created then developers and designers who completely even forgot about accessibility. Those went to other companies, and you see this perpetually you know um, forgetting the to care about accessibility created what we have today, a 98% inaccessible web. Because even if every day, I don't know how many applications and web apps are made, which is a lot, still a lot of the internet has been around, a lot of the websites have been around for many, many years. But the kind of the skills and the attitudes have been kind of passed on from engineer to engineer, from designer to designer, from one company to the other company, to the point where everybody kind of forgot that this is actually a thing, other than a few who cared and kept caring. Now it's on the upswing again. Like the companies are starting to pick up again. It's we're going in the right direction now. But yeah, to answer your question, that's why it happened. It's just ignorance at a massive scale.
It's a bit like
So,
building
sorry,
regulations.
sorry, Andrew. Is there a standard? Like, is there a standard that these companies have to to meet, or is it up to them? Is it their own decision whether how accessible they make their own?
There is a standard, and it's the first of all, you have the HTML standard, which is the web pages are based on, and then you have the WCAG standard, which is specifically for accessibility. And some of those things have been pushed by governments in various countries, as the minimum requirement level for companies to reach, but it was only on the government level. So government websites have to adhere to that, because it's a requirement to provide something accessible. But other than that, there wasn't, until recently, there wasn't, and to some extent there still isn't, a law that forces companies to adhere to it.
Is there anything sort of around discrimination, like even like your simple discrimination laws that would probably come into that? I remember there was a lawsuit from someone who couldn't access, I think it was a pizza
Domino's.
Hut or something, Domino's or something like that.
I think it was Domino's.
Yeah, they weren't able to, and they brought a big lawsuit. I think they won the case as well, and that sort of put a big set some sort of standard for the rest of them. It might actually cost you a lot more money, having to pay out in lawsuits if someone comes with a suit.
Yeah, the lawsuits happen, but I when I think of lawsuits, I think that while they're a good way to raise awareness around accessibility on the web, I also see like every tool being used the wrong way. Growing the number of litigious people who just now find an excuse to file a lawsuit and make money off of. I still believe it's much better to teach and educate in a kind way, rather than in a way that you kind of make them, you push fear into companies to achieve something that should be just part of the natural design and development process of something. If companies act on fear rather than understanding what their users need, then we're not going in the right direction.
No, and also money has to play a big part of it, as in what your clients are prepared to pay you to build a website. The kind of, and maybe they want to have tons of ads on their website, which makes it very difficult for someone who's got accessibility needs, makes it difficult for them to browse it or to access that. But they need to bring the money in, so they're sort of pressuring you to, well, the money, our budget needs to be spent on getting revenue in, and then sort of the if there is an accessibility thing, it's usually in like an add-on, and it's like one of those badly designed ramps into a building. It's not part, and I do a wee bit of web design. That's my job actually, so I do a fair bit of it. But my experience has been, if you make things simpler, they're more accessible. As in, the more stuff you add, the more chance you're going to lose people. If you're bringing in complicated coding and stuff, but if you keep, like you're talking about the HTML, sorry Neil, but there's that's sort of the structure and stuff, keeping all that very simple. I think it's a bit like building a building, and where if you keep things simple, actually makes things a lot more accessible. But if you make a really nice shiny building, then you go, oh, hold on a second, we need to allow people with wheelchairs to use it and stuff. Then everything is just added on, and yeah, that's been my experience. And I think I don't know if it's not just the digital world, but keeping things simple, rather than trying to sort of, I suppose, design for ourselves, trying to think about other people for a bit.
I do think that there's some truth in saying that simplicity is divine. It definitely helps achieve something accessible when you keep things simple. Now, I've also seen that being brought up as an excuse not to do it, because I've seen designers and developers say, yeah, but I want to build something complicated. I want to build a complex web application. I want, all these features for my users, and they're all valid requests. To which my answer is, you can still do it. It will just cost you more. It takes time to do the fancy and the complicated and still keep it accessible, because you also cannot provide a complex and high level experience to one type of user and then something simplified down for the rest of the users who are disabled, because that's a discrimination lawsuit right there. The same product has to work for both groups. You can't. I remember for a while there, for a few years, I've seen websites having the accessible version, which was an absolute disaster to look at. It was accessible in fairness, but it was just text and links everywhere.
I think there's there's a local newspaper that I won't name who have a website that is full of ads, and I don't think it's an accessibility problem. I think it's a usability problem, because there's so many ads on the page that it's actually very hard to read the news, and that's one thing that gets easily missed. And a bit like what you were saying there, Paul, as well. How you make it simple, and it tends to be more accessible. It also tends to be more usable. Yes, you might have a desire to plaster ads all over your site. Maybe you really need to make the money, but maybe you should look at other ways to make the money, because that creates a really poor experience for people, just in general.
Attila, we're talking as well about going away from our side of things to everybody's side of things, which is communicating on Facebook and so on. And I don't know if you probably have a few thoughts around this, but I think people have got a wee bit more spice here over the last couple of years, especially maybe lockdown has driven people a bit crazy, but people are getting a bit angry online and stuff. Have you got any thoughts around how we are do things better around communication?
Yeah, I mean, Facebook is I suppose it's not the only one, but it's probably one of the main ones. I remember when the first such platform I used was actually High Five, and then I know a lot of people in the West don't know about it. It was fairly mid-Eastern European thing, but it was basically Facebook before Facebook, and it's kind of funny because whatever people are complaining about Facebook now, the same was true 15 years ago, for High Five as well. I haven't used Facebook in the last 2 years at all. Like I deleted my account entirely. And the reason I did that was actually I was on a date with someone who was very much into mindfulness, and she explained to me that there was at one point some scientists made an experiment in a some remote tribe on some island, I think. And they just kind of watched their daily lives, and this tribe would randomly at given times though would just lie down on the ground, close their eyes, and stay there for 10 minutes, and then they would get up again and do their business. And they were asked, why are you doing this? And their response was, there's too many things happening around us. We need to switch off for a little bit. And she said, when you use Facebook or Instagram or any of these applications, you keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. That's information bombarding your brain. You don't need all that information. That information actually exhausts you without realizing. It will create mood swings. It will create situations that otherwise would not happen. Simply because your brain just cannot take that much information and all. it's not also not consistent information. It's coming from all sorts of various unverified sources. It's kind of like constant brain dumps from other people. So it's no surprise that the more you use these platforms, such as Facebook, the more you'll start behaving irrationally. And I don't mean like, becoming an absolute nut job, but you will start behaving the way you not normally behave in public, in an actual group. Even at the pub, even after 5 pints, you wouldn't behave like that. The social norms kind of get lost online when all this information gets hitting you all the time. And I saw this at the beginning of the pandemic as well, when people were sharing all these voice messages about how the pandemic is going to happen, and you need to go buy toilet paper, you need to go buy bread, you need to go buy this and that, because my cousin's dog, cousin's cat said that this is when a lockdown is happening, and everybody's going to be shut down in the house, and the guardian will stand at the door and stuff like that. The misinformation just goes rampant.
So what about the misinformation? Because people might share something that they've seen. What's your advice for making sure that what you're putting up you can sort of stand behind, or you're sure it's coming from a factual point of view or whatever?
Data checking and fact checking is a very difficult task. I think back in during the Edwardian era, and I'm going to make a kind of a parallel between electricity and internet now. In the Edwardian era, when electricity was a fairly new thing, a lot of electronic devices and electric devices started popping up all over the place. People started having electrical wires in the house for various appliances. Insulation was terrible or none at all. Like, we've made a lot of mistakes when starting to use the electricity. We're kind of doing the same with the internet. Like Andrew said, the internet has been there for a long time now. It's been there for about 10, 30 years. In the grand scheme of things, it's still in its infancy. So what we're living now is it's akin to the no insulated electrical wires in the house kind of internet, where it's kind of a cowboy's world. It won't change very much in the very near future. I think this is the time when it becomes popular. Everybody's on it, but it's not well regulated. It's hard to understand what's real, what's not real, what information is correct, what isn't. It takes a lot of education to help people understand what to use and how to use on the internet, where to source their information from. And unfortunately, education is kind of always a little bit behind the reality, because something has to happen for us to learn something from it and then pass that information on, that learning on to others. So unfortunately, I think for the next even 10 or even 20 years, there will be a lot of weirdness going around the internet. And with deep fakes being out there at the moment, that's a very popular thing that people like to play around with, but they also put it out there, so kind of messes with people's brains. I know my father, for example, he doesn't really quite get what an actual YouTube video is with actual information, and what a YouTube video is with fake information, because it's just for him it's all new. He's been using the YouTube for like a year. So just like in the real world, when you go out on the street and somebody's grandmother says that, you heard about this person and that person, what they did, you don't know if it's true or if it's not true. It's gossip. It kind of comes down to you to decide, is my source of information really that reliable or not? the problem is that now this is everywhere. Everybody has a phone. So, the information from that somebody's grandmother, that old lady, would probably travel a few houses or a couple of streets, but now it travels around the globe. So, the impact is higher.
You've reminded me of a story that I heard about Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla. So back in those early days of electricity, Tesla and Edison were competing with two different types of electricity: alternating current and direct current. And Edison tried to prove that Tesla's alternating current was dangerous by running it through an elephant and killing it.
Yeah.
It's true. It was dangerous. He killed the elephant, but that wasn't the whole truth. And I think you're right that we're at that point with the internet where there's lots of half truths and misinformation out there.
And the thing that winds me up. So going back to your first point, Attila, common sense, good manners, and education. Like, there's too many people that I follow on Twitter that have none of those three things. But the problem is that there seems to be absolutely no consequences to, and I don't know if you have anything to say to that, but there's very little consequences for people, the language that people use, the tone, all of that sort of stuff that people use. There never seems to be any consequences for it, so people just keep on abusing people, using racially abusive language, because the consequences to doing that are so minimal that it's not a deterrent to people at all. Is that fair to say?
It is, and unfortunately, this is part of that cowboy world issue that we see on the internet for the time being. And social media has exasperated that problem. Mostly before social media, people communicated on forums, or chat rooms. And I as a forum moderator back in the day, we'd have discussions that we would call flame discussion, because people just started, bashing at each other's head, in text. And then we would tend to shut those down. But those were fairly small forums, where one or two moderators were able to kind of control things. Now you're dealing with the number of users that has reached in the billions. So now you need automated systems that are not really that good. And you can see that companies are trying to some extent to limit the damage, partly because they realize that they have to, and partly because there's political push to do that, because you don't, a certain country would probably not want certain kind of ideologies to spread on the internet. But I there's no consequences, because the legal systems that we have currently don't really know. Like, they're learning as well as we're learning how to use the internet. They're learning how to create consequences, I suppose, for misbehavior. You're dealing with an unregulated kind of industry there. The web isn't really regulated. It has a few basic rules, and that's it. You can create a website and put whatever you want on it.
I think you're starting to see things like Me Too and cancel culture as some sort of outworking of a backlash against people saying whatever they want. However, that it is unregulated and it can go too far the other direction. But it's got to the point where there is a critical mass of people starting to speak out, and maybe that will start to have an impact. But there are definitely free speech concerns, and I know even from the church there are free speech concerns. In the past year, there's been churches have talked about their rights being taken away from not being able to meet in person, things like that. What do you think, Attila?
I better mute myself here before.
I know. It's I read something earlier I think I was just randomly scrolling through Twitter, like Attila is advising us not to do. Someone talking about people who say they are being, they're being silenced, and they're going on to, Good Morning America to tell people how they're being silenced. It's like that's not silence. You don't go on to breakfast TV if you if you've been silenced. But yes, so Attila, that thought about freedom of speech, freedom of information, because the idea of moderating in a small forum is good. Even in those forums, there were people who were always out against the moderators, and complaining that the moderators, and definitely there are forums where moderators had their own political leanings or, their own opinions and could moderate too heavily. We have computers doing moderation and they don't do a good job. Where do we go?
Right. Before I answer that, I have a question for Neil.
This hasn't happened before.
You're saying that there are all these people on social media that you follow, who have neither common sense nor don't seem to be educated or have good manners. Question is, why do you follow them?
Yeah,
because this is one of the solutions. Not give them the voice. If people stop following them, then I don't want to go back to World War, but a lot of the bad directions we took in politics over the last few hundred years were because somebody had an idea and there were a lot of people who listened. If people wouldn't have listened, we would have never had probably the 2 world wars that we had. So when you follow someone who then turns out to be not really that smart or good mannered or having a lot of common sense, unfollow them. If you do need social media for some reason, then use fairly heavy-handed filtering on everything that you get.
Yeah, I suppose honestly, I probably asked that question more generally. There's, in terms of like those 3 criteria, I find really helpful. I don't think I do follow anybody that doesn't meet one of those 3 criteria. My frustration, what my personal frustration is, Attila, and that's where I probably should unfollow, are those probably that I think do know better, that are educated, that do have common sense, but they're starting to communicate to people that think differently than they do, that look differently than they do, and then hiding behind this stuff that Andrew's talking about, the freedom of speech. And that honestly, it causes me real upset whenever I see people that I think they're sort of, in many ways, they're representing the sort of the faith that I sort of would ascribe to, but how they're communicating to people who are different than them and think differently, and then hide behind rights, hide behind freedom of speech. I honestly find it incredibly I do find it's almost soul destroying, and I should, you're right, I probably shouldn't follow, but it's almost hard to miss it at times.
Yeah, I understand, and it's I've seen it. It's very, very common for people to kind of hide behind free speech, and of course there's legal variations of what free speech means as well from country to country. But to me it really comes down to, yes, you should have free speech in the sense that you should be allowed to articulate your view on something, in fact anything, in a civilized manner. You can disagree, and I love discussions where a lot of people disagree with other people, because those are the most colorful discussions you can have. When everybody agrees, it's a boring conversation. It's like talking to yourself.
You ever been to Speaker's Corner, Attila? Do you know what I'm talking about? In London? It's amazing. So they would have people stand. You have to bring a little podium to stand on, and you get to talk about whatever it is you want. And there's lots of, it's very controversial, but it's very structured. Mm-hmm. Because people are able to, they give their speech, and then they have to hear the retorts and stuff and the reactions and answer to that. But they get a chance to enact their freedom of speech, but then they have to face the consequences of it.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, well, we have a right of freedom of speech, but we also need to make sure that we're prepared for the consequences for it.
Yeah,
So it's not just it. I feel sometimes that online at its worst is almost like a digital version of throwing stones at people. It's like, the old medieval way of stoning people. So you don't get hurt, you inflict the stuff, and you're in a safe place. And I think it's at its worst, I think that's what the internet is a bit like. But
it is, and
yeah,
that's largely because well, it has been exasperated by the pandemic because people spend a whole lot more on the web and
yeah,
applications, social media, than they would spend with their actual friends or relatives or whoever else.
yeah, and it's a confusing time as well. I think everybody's probably trying to figure out answers and stuff, and
Yeah, but see, this is where education comes in again. I'm not sure how much in schools here people are or children are taught how to have a debate rather than a shout at each other. Because debates are very, very interesting, as long as you know how to express your view. Um, I think it really does come down to just not attacking the other person. You can completely disagree, and there are very controversial topics in the world, but as long as you're able to put your view in a way that doesn't offend, and you make sure that, first of all, everybody understands that this is your view and you're expressing it based on the information you have. um, I think most people will find that fairly easy to respond to. And when you have factual evidence, I think people should also make sure that the evidence supports their views. Saying the Earth is flat, for example, and then not being able to show any evidence for it, you know,
what?
you
Hold
can have
on.
the
You
view.
tell me it's not flat?
I'm not saying it's flat. I'm not saying it isn't. All I'm saying is that a view that tries to convey something that they believe is factual, it needs to be supported by facts.
Yeah. So Attila, I spoke on Zoom on Sunday morning, and over Twitter on social media, somebody sent me a message to say that they disagreed with what I said.
Mm-hmm.
But the great thing was, and what I'm hearing from you, and what I think we touched on a wee bit in our conversation last week as well, is that it's something that I think we really need to get better at in terms of how we disagree and debate well and disagree well. So what I appreciated was that he communicated to me why he disagreed with what I said. He didn't send me a YouTube clip of somebody. He sent me a well thought out reason of why he disagreed, and it led to such healthy debate. And I didn't change his mind, and he certainly didn't change my mind. But it was incredibly healthy debate, and I really appreciated. I think I valued the disagreement that I had between him rather than somebody saying that was really good. What are you doing next? You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I really valued that. And so Peter last week was communicating this idea of sitting or getting a tea, buying a cup of tea for somebody that you disagree with, and being able to sit and communicate that. And so that's what I desire for not only for technology but for humanity, for life in general, that we could just do that so much better.
Yeah, and it's funny because technically, social media such as Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever else people use would be a great medium to exercise this ability to debate. It could be the exact opposite of what these platforms are at the moment. But if we don't educate people from a young age to use these tools, because at the end of the day they are tools that can be used the right way or the wrong way, then I think we're kind of predisposed to using them the wrong way.
Yeah, that's really good. I think we'd probably be a good place to to stop and wrap up. But before we go, I think Neil has a very important question to
Come
ask.
on. It's a vital question.
Okay.
I don't know how the boys have prepped you for this, Attila, but I always like to find out what people are reading, listening to, or watching that they could recommend to me selfishly, but also to those listening in.
Okay. What have I watched lately? Unfortunately, this will be difficult for you to watch because it just so happens that I watched a TV series that was in Romanian. I haven't watched anything in ages that was in Romanian, and this was it. It's well translated. The title is Shadows, and it's about a father who kind of falls into a bad gang of drug dealers and stuff like that. And well, it's a little bit like, have you seen Love Hate, the TV series?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah,
Channel 4?
it's yeah, or RT, one of those. But either way, it's kind of the Romanian version of Love Hate. I was sometimes wondering if they were kind of inspired by that. In terms of reading, I actually have to say I haven't really kind of finished a book in ages.
Reading,
so-
not writing. I mean,
Yeah, I write a whole lot more than I read.
yeah.
It's weird. And in terms of music, I actually discovered this band the other day, the Latums. I think they're English, if I'm not mistaken. It's alternative pop rock kind of thing. They're quite good. Unfortunately, I cannot find any vinyl records, so I'm a bit late to the party. But
Okay. So we'll brush up on Romanian and check out Shadows.
yeah, it's well, I can send you on the link later. I'm not sure if they have any subtitles on it. If you
It'll
like subtitles, then it's
No.
probably watchable.
Is
It'll
it called
probably end
Umbre
up on
in
Netflix very
Romania?
Yeah,
soon.
that's the one. Yeah.
It's just popped up on Wikipedia. Apparently, there is, you can get English subtitles or something for it. So
Yeah, interesting.
yeah,
It's very good. I actually enjoyed it.
it looks pretty dark from the poster.
It is fairly dark, and it's fairly explicit. So if you're not into that, then maybe avoid it.
And before the boys finish up, Attila, although this isn't my specialised subject, I really enjoyed that. Really appreciated your wisdom and some of your thinking around this. I do think there's parallels to what you're saying with other walks of life, which I think are really interesting for us all to wrestle with. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you
thank
for
you.
coming on.
All right. Thank you for having me again.
Talk soon.
All right. Take care.
Ordinary People was hosted by Neil Dawson. It was produced, edited and engineered by Andrew Gribbin and Paul Woods. Head over to ordinarypodcast.com for show notes, links, previous episodes and all the ways you can contact the show. See you next time.